when Kalen Georgescu was in the lead in the first runoff of the presidential election in Romania, with more than 50% of the vote, with the rest split between 7 or 8 candidates. It was a flagrant election-stealing piece of skullduggery, the likes of which had never been seen in the European Union before. There was outrage, but the election was to be rerun. Georgescu's nomination papers were accepted, and the opinion polls show he was set for a landslide victory in the Romanian presidential election. And today, the very same electoral board of judges and non-judges have invalidated his presidential candidature. It is truly unbelievable that in a European Union that describes itself as a garden of democracy, that such incredible criminality can be shown in an important and large European Union country, namely Romania. It is incredible still that nobody in the Western media is giving it any coverage at all. How could they? It is the most flagrant theft of the Romanian people's democratic rights that it is possible to imagine. And there's only 24 hours to sort it out. I'm unequivocal on this, that if the Supreme Court of Romania does not reverse this blatant theft and criminality, the Romanian people will have to rise up and remove their regime. They have done so once before, you may recall. It didn't end well on Christmas Day of 1989 for Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Elena, who were gunned down by a firing squad against the wall. It is incredible that the only offense, by the way, Georgescu politically is a world apart from me. I'm not carrying a flag for him, except in one regard. And it's the one regard that has led to this theft, this attempted coup d'etat. Georgescu wants to end the war in Ukraine. He refuses to allow Romania to be built into a NATO base camp to be used across the short sea against the Russian Federation. He refuses to allow Romania to be anybody's puppet state. And that's the only thing I have in common with him. He's a figure of the right, of the nationalist right. He makes Nigel Farage look like a leftist. I have nothing whatsoever to do with him. But I do love Romania. I do actually have a book published in the Romanian language. I was there very recently. I love the people, I love the country, and I will not stand silent while their rights are trampled upon and while their presidential election is stolen. It was a massacre of the minorities, and helpfully, you may think, the mass murderers filmed themselves whilst doing it. During Ramadan, with grins all over their faces, they hunted down and gunned down men and women, young and old, the only common characteristic, all unarmed. Such tough guys, these head-chopping, heart-eating, fanatic Islamist extremists are. They're very good at cutting the heads of people whose hands are tied behind their back and who cannot fight them back. They're very good at murdering women, although they like to keep their women locked away, and they like to keep the women they stole from other people locked away. Yazidi women, for example. They are big on women's modesty, but that doesn't stretch to not murdering them in their homes. Helpfully, you may think, they've filmed themselves doing it. Therefore, the culpability cannot be shared. The culpability cannot be obscured. They had their patches, ISIS and Al-Qaeda patches, on their arms. They were chanting obscenely the name of God whilst they murdered people in cold blood, many hundreds of them, maybe thousands of them. And yet, this massacre of the minorities in Syria over the last few days is virtually unreported on Western media, particularly in those countries that did the most to put these maniacs into power, to usher the black flags of ISIS and Al-Qaeda into Damascus. Their media, so tightly controlled, they're not even reporting a massacre of Christian people, of Alawi people, of Shia and Druze people by their clients, by their agents, by the people they armed and funded. David Lammy gave £50 million to these people just last week. The British Foreign Secretary gave £50 million of your money. Do you know what for? To help them build an inclusive government. Inclusive government. Well, that inclusive government's gunmen just massacred the people that London presumably was referring to as those that needed to be included. The United States is the only country in the Western world that has roundly condemned the massacre and has attributed to the people who took the videos. You hear what I'm saying? They took the videos. The United States presidency attributed it to the Islamist fanatics of HTS, the rebrand of Al-Qaeda in Syria, and their ISIS allies. The European Union, on the other hand, did not mention the people who took the videos and blamed the minorities for getting themselves massacred. It was community noted on Twitter within half an hour, but it still stands extant as the European Union's position on the massacre of hundreds, if not thousands, of people. The legendary white helmets are already in, cleaning up. I've got a picture on my phone of the white helmets picking up the corpses, dumping them in skips to take them away, just in case there's any international observer remotely interested in finding out what happened. But of course, so far, there are none. The European Union backed HTS and the mass murderers. The United States condemned the mass murderers. The British government, on the other hand, has said nothing at all. Least of all, asking for its £50 million back, now that we know that the idea of an inclusive government in Syria has just been drowned in blood. I asked, it's been very widely shared and remarked upon on Twitter, will anybody at all, intervene to defend the Christians of Syria, where Jesus once walked, the people who speak the language of Jesus, Aramaic? Will anybody intervene? If this was in Yugoslavia, NATO would already be there. If this was in any other part of the world, the demand for United Nations action, the demand for RTP, right to protect, the right to humanitarian intervention would already be filling our airwaves. But as I've told you, the airwaves are entirely silent. So no hue and cry is possible. No one will intervene except Russia. Russia has already intervened. It has opened its airbase in Latakia, and something like 20,000 refugees are now cowering inside it. Daring, I suppose, if you think that the ISIS and Al-Qaeda people would not like to clamber over the wall of the Russian airbase. You don't know them like I know them. Iran, if they were to move in to protect their co-religionists, would declare war on them. If Iraq intervened to protect their co-religionists, we'd declare war on Iraq. If anybody at all were to intervene, it would be condemned, unless it was Israel, which is already in possession of fully 1/3 of Syrian territory and is undoubtedly dancing a jig of delight, like that one on top of that van in New York City on 9/11, because this is exactly the Syria they spent so much lobbying time trying to bring about. I said many times, for 10 years I've been saying to you that what we have done in Syria is the dirtiest thing that we have ever done, and we have done many dirty things. It is beyond the comprehension of any sentient being who was given the facts, key caveat, that we would have tried so much, so hard to bring Al-Qaeda and ISIS to power in a country on the Mediterranean, the European lake. I just say this, it's all I can say. I'm out of words, to be honest. If you think these Uzbeks and Tajiks and Uyghurs and Algerians that are cutting the throats of the minorities in Syria are going to remain in Syria and not visit a Christmas market near you, or a London Bridge, or a Bataclan, or any of the other massacres carried out by precisely these very same people, you're an idiot. You don't deserve the vote if you're going to vote for people that will put knives in the hands of these assassins who will later come to assassinate you. Now, the disaster in Kursk is almost painfully poignant to recount. It was his biggest victory, said Zelensky, when he invaded Russian territory as a quid pro quo for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. He poured reinforcements into it. Well over 100,000 soldiers were poured into the Kursk salient in Russia, and they have resisted an enormous counterattack by Russia to remove them. It's not looking that much like a victory now, and I take no pleasure in that, because for some reason, whether it's blockers behind them who'll shoot them if they try to surrender, these brave Ukrainian soldiers have refused to surrender, even although they are completely surrounded and there is no way out of the Kursk salient now. Russia has given them deadline after deadline to surrender their weapons, NATO weapons, the best NATO weapons. There'll be some great reverse engineering done when this is all over in Kursk. But the Ukrainian soldiers are not surrendering, and therefore Russia is about to rain down fatal firepower upon them, and scores of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers will be destroyed. Those of you who say you love Ukraine, those of you who wave Ukrainian flags, wear Ukrainian badges, have Ukrainian flags in your avatars, you don't love Ukraine. You hate Ukrainians. You must hate Ukrainians, because you have cheered on every maneuver, every effort that has so spectacularly rebounded on the suffering people of Ukraine. I can only conclude that you hate Ukraine. You don't love it at all. It's not Slava Ukraine that you're shouting, really. It's death to Ukraine. At least it's death to Ukrainians, because perhaps 1 million of them have already lost their lives, and hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of them are maimed, mutilated, or their minds destroyed for the rest of their lives because of the proxy war that you helped propel them into. Now, I used to be called a Russian agent for calling it a proxy war. This was a Putin talking point, don't you know? Except it's now a Donald Trump administration talking point. Both Rubio and Kellogg, General Kellogg, have both stated unequivocally this is a proxy war between the United States and the Russian Federation. And all you idiots that, like Pavlov's dogs, barked, Putin, 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 whenever anybody said that, whether it was Candace Owens or me, must feel, or at least ought to feel, thoroughly embarrassed now. So now that the American administration has openly declared it to be a proxy war in which they have no further interest, and the examples of the extent to which that's true will be adumbrated by my first guest, Ray McGovern, in just a few minutes. Now that one side of a proxy war is withdrawing, you'd think that would mean the end of the war, except you didn't bargain for little soldier Schultz, little Merz, little Anna Baerbock, little Napoleon Macron, and little Keir Starmer. Because out of nowhere, like the 600, they have decided to gallop into the valley of death, into the guns, onward and onward, into the guns. The unfortunate thing is it's not them on the horses. The unfortunate thing is it's not them that are going to be cut down by the guns. It's your sons and even your daughters. Latvia today announced the beginning of conscription for boys and girls. When I launched last week the No Conscription League in Britain, I hadn't quite counted on the amount of support that it would immediately rally, including a very significant number, a statistically significant number of ex-service personnel, the only people really who know what war is really like. And even if you have no son or daughter about to be sent into the guns, it's your money that's going to pay for it. I have only 1 minute to deal with a very strange phenomenon which in the last 48 hours has erupted in the United States. First of all, a professor at UCLA, not a small deal that, a professor at the UCLA has in writing called for the US military to stage a military coup in Washington and remove the Trump administration from office. A House staffer was caught with a gun in the rotunda headed for the very room that President Trump was sitting in earlier last week. And he said he didn't understand what the big deal was because he'd brought the same gun into the same building the day before as a kind of dry run. White House security men shot and wounded a man in the grounds of the White House who was armed earlier today. And J.D. Vance, the able Vice President of the United States, was surrounded by Ukrainian protesters as he walked, unwisely I must say, with his 3-year-old child, who was terrified at the Slava Ukrainian crowd that angrily surrounded the Vice President of the United States. All of this tells me that the security forces of the United States of America have not stepped up to the mark. And we may very well see another nightmare on Elm Street, a la Dallas, Texas, November 1963, in 2025, somewhere in America. If that doesn't make you sit up and take notice, I don't know what would. Ray McGovern, former presidential advisor, CIA man, coming up right after this.